What follows is not just another tale of a brutal crime. It unfolded in a peaceful American suburb, a community built on implicit trust, where doors stay unlocked, and where such brutality was unthinkable, and everyone recognized his face. They entrusted him with their kids. He blessed their newborns, all while hiding his own dark, warped desires, the kind that could chill you to the bone. Until one Halloween, when those hidden urges violently broke loose. In that instant, one young woman's life was irrevocably destroyed. Before we get into the details, as you're listening, drop a comment with your city and the weather there. I'm curious to know where you're all tuning in from for this. Perhaps it's raining, late at night, cozy inside, or are you heading home as you listen? And please, remember to like and subscribe. It helps the channel immensely. Now, settle in. Kill the lights, if you dare. Today's case is one that rattled a town, making people fear their protectors. On March 26, 1988, Thomas and Sally Gay welcomed their daughter, Rebecca. She and her 3 siblings were raised in Midland, Michigan. Her father, Thomas, was a pillar of the local community. He was known for his mastery of riding, caring for, and training horses. He co-founded a charity race that raised money for a local children's hospital. His compassion was well known, extending to people and animals alike. For his children, Thomas was a role model of unity, faith, and hard work. Rebecca grew up with the security only a small, tight-knit town provides. It was a place where everyone knew each other. Her childhood was playing outside with siblings, going to church with family, and attending the neighborhood school. Her gentle, empathetic nature, a clear inheritance from her parents, made her stand out. Then, an incurable illness struck Rebecca's father. The family made the difficult choice to place him in hospice for constant care. His family visited often, hoping to ease the burden of his final days. During this period, in high school at the time, Rebecca joined the equestrian team. She volunteered at archery events, raising funds for families in need. She was, in essence, continuing his legacy. After graduating in 2007, Rebecca chose a career in beauty and enrolled in cosmetology school. At the time, she was in a serious romance with Chad Sando. Finishing her program, she became a stylist at a salon in Mount Pleasant, near where her mother Sally resided. After Thomas passed away, Sally was overcome by a crushing loneliness. Her children were grown and building their own lives, leaving her alone to face her anxieties about the future. After a lifetime with Thomas, facing the future alone was daunting. Overwhelmed by the solitude, she wasn't searching for a husband online, just a way to quiet the loneliness. Romance wasn't her goal. All she really wanted was someone to talk with, a person who would just listen. To escape that crushing isolation, she found a mobile home in the Broomfield Valley Trailer Park. Before long, she connected with a man she'd been messaging. He was John Douglas White from Augusta, Michigan, which was about a 2-hour drive away. Their connection developed so quickly they soon decided to live together. John even became a pastor where Sally taught Sunday school, and the two shared a wonderful companionship. They found they shared so much, especially their deep Christian faith. The town of Mount Pleasant, Michigan, was home to just under 20,000 people. Sally's residence was a 20-minute drive from town, a rustic area with lovely farms and peaceful landscapes. It was a serene environment, the perfect sort of community for raising children. Rebecca, Sally's younger daughter, found out she was expecting and later gave birth to a baby boy they called Connor. She and the baby's father, Chad, tried their best to give the boy a stable upbringing. But for many young parents, the arrival of a baby can be an enormous test of their relationship. In their situation, the pressure was simply too much for Chad to handle. While Rebecca was utterly changed by becoming a mother, Connor became her entire world. She devoted herself completely to giving him the best possible life. And while Rebecca had always been a deeply caring and reliable person, being a mom gave her a new sense of purpose as she balanced a job with being a single parent. And through all the hardship, she never once complained, choosing instead to view her life with a quiet sense of gratitude. Needing more support, she rented a mobile home near her mother in the Broomfield Valley Trailer Park. It brought her profound comfort knowing her mom and John were just across the street. Rebecca and her son were over at their house almost every evening. John would cook for them and help with Connor, and he cherished having that family dynamic again. He naturally fell into the role of a father figure for Rebecca and a grandfather for Connor. He would take the boy to daycare and look after him whenever Rebecca couldn't. Rebecca had previously pursued a career in the cosmetology field, but after Connor's birth, the long shifts at the salon were no longer practical, so she found work in a Mount Pleasant retail store. Her mother and John were her trusted childcare, and the four of them formed a single, close-knit family. Rebecca was well liked by her new colleagues and was quickly promoted into a management position. At the same time, her personal life was also finally falling into place. She was introduced to a man named Aaron Quinn when Connor was about 1 year of age. Aaron immediately embraced the little boy, as if he were his own flesh and blood. He adored Rebecca, treated her with respect, and was already planning to ask for her hand in marriage. Aaron's own family welcomed Rebecca as if she had always belonged, and Sally, along with her partner John White, gave the relationship their wholehearted approval. In return, Rebecca had swiftly welcomed John as a part of her own family. Once, when he was laid up with a bad cold, she made him homemade soup, fetched his prescriptions, and even had a pizza delivered for him, repaying his endless help with Connor. For the first time, Rebecca felt she had a genuine support system and a future filled with promise. To be surrounded by such decent, caring people was everything she could have asked for. She led a humble life, but it was one filled with affection, ensuring her son never went without. In 2012, with Halloween drawing near, Connor was only 3 years old. Rebecca was especially thrilled. It had been her most cherished holiday since she was a girl, and Connor was now at that perfect age where the magic of costumes and candy was the greatest thing imaginable. His Spider-Man costume had already been chosen. The store where she was a manager had just received a delivery of scarecrows, and she'd purchased 8 of them for her yard decorations. Rebecca adored decorating for the season. There were pumpkins everywhere, along with imitation cobwebs and spooky signs on the door. She held nothing back. On Halloween Eve, it was just her and Connor at home. The next morning, she was scheduled to drop him off with Chad, his biological father, as he was meant to have him for the day. She planned to retrieve him after her shift, help him into his costume, and then take him on his first ever trick-or-treating excursion. Overcome with excitement, she called her mother and Aaron just to talk about it. That evening, she was her typical cheerful self, energetic, and for the last several months, she'd been taking an early shift to have more time with her son, which is why, on October 31st, 2012, her failure to arrive at work baffled her managers and co-workers. Rebecca hadn't called or even sent a text. As a manager, she would never just miss a shift. Alarmingly, all attempts to contact her failed. Her supervisor sent a colleague to her house to check on the situation. Perhaps she had car issues or was in need of help. But when he arrived, his knocking went unanswered. The home appeared empty. He tried the door and found it locked. So he returned to his car to leave. But as he drove away, something strange caught his attention. Just a short distance from Rebecca's residence, parked in the lot of a local bar, was a light blue 4-door Buick. He recognized it as Rebecca Gay's car, but its location made no sense. She had parking right beside her own home. The co-worker went into the bar to ask about it. The bartender on duty recalled seeing the vehicle, but insisted Rebecca had never come inside. The prior evening, she was with her son, making it unthinkable that she would abandon him to visit a bar. The bar's staff, however, located the phone number for the trailer park owner. The owner agreed to open Rebecca's door, letting the coworker verify if she was safe. Rebecca was just 24, young, and healthy. The worst possibilities were now racing through his mind. Maybe she was incapacitated inside, but the trailer was vacant. The only thing he found was her favorite purse, sitting unclasped on the table. She took it everywhere. It was a cherished gift she'd received from Aaron. Her co-worker immediately phoned Sally and John to ask if Rebecca had mentioned any change of plans. The instant her mother heard Rebecca missed work, she and John sped to her home. Neighbors started to gather near the trailer, their hushed tones questioning where the young mother had gone. Around midday, the family filed an official missing persons report with the county sheriff's department. But because Rebecca was an adult, authorities were reluctant to launch a search. Officers didn't want to overreact, but they knew the situation was unsettling. They agreed to wait until 4:30 that afternoon, when Rebecca was due to pick up Connor, just to rule out a simple mix-up. To miss work was unusual, To ignore her family and boyfriend was alarming, and when a mother fails to retrieve her own child, something is terribly wrong. 4.5 crucial hours were lost. Time for gathering information and securing evidence, and for discovering what truly happened to her. All Rebecca's family could do was wait. John White started reaching out to her friends and contacts. As a pastor, he also called on his congregation, asking for their help in the search. Sally prayed for her daughter's safe return, hoping for an innocent explanation. The family fought against the rising panic, but in truth, it was a losing battle. That morning, Connor's drop-off was set for the grocery store lot for Chad to pick him up. With Rebecca on the day shift, she couldn't make the drop-off, so her parents stepped in. John got to the trailer at 7 o'clock. While Rebecca got ready for work, he waited for Connor to stir, then dressed the boy and took him to meet his father. Nothing had seemed out of place to John that morning, a fact that now haunted him. How could Rebecca just disappear so completely, so fast? 4:30 came and went. There was no sign of her. By that time, police had a warrant to search her residence and her vehicle. Her purse was open, but her phone and keys were missing. There was no sign of a break-in, meaning she left with the items, or someone took them. The most disturbing discovery was a patch of carpet in the hall. It appeared fluffier, as if recently scrubbed. Upon closer look, detectives saw dark stains. It could have been blood, or a spill Connor made that his mom had cleaned, but then they discovered tiny blood droplets on a wall. Faint spatter was also visible on kitchen cabinets and the doorknob. These finds were so alarming, police cordoned off the house with yellow tape, a stark contrast to the cheerful Halloween decorations still up in the yard. They then inspected her car and found something was immediately wrong. Rebecca was a petite woman, so she kept the driver's seat adjusted far forward. Now, it was pushed all the way back. She couldn't have possibly reached the pedals. On top of that, the car was parked strangely, tucked back by some trees, as if deliberately concealed, raising even more alarms. At that moment, investigators were certain a crime had been committed. They began questioning relatives, friends, and colleagues. They wanted to know who could want to harm Rebecca Gay. Nobody had a clue. She was kind, quiet, and avoided conflict. She never took part in risky behavior. She had no known enemies. As neighborhood children celebrated Halloween, racing around in costume to collect candy, a wave of terror was washing over Rebecca's family. What should have been Connor's first Halloween was now forever defined by his mother's vanishing. The little boy's Spider-Man costume remained unworn. The day's traditions were abandoned. John simply pleaded with a church elder to pray for Rebecca's return. One can only guess what the family endured, as people paraded in costumes dripping with fake blood, knowing that inside Rebecca's home, the real thing had been found by investigators. Halloween night was now a source of pure dread, a chilling memory that would haunt them always. The fun of costumes was gone. A real monster could be lurking behind any disguise. Suspicion quickly centered on two men, Chad Sando, Connor's father, and Aaron Quinn, her current partner. When a woman is the victim of a crime, the spotlight almost always turns first to the men in her life. Both were brought in for questioning at the station. Aaron was cooperative from the start, appearing genuinely devastated by her disappearance. He knew how she cherished the holiday. He reported their last conversation was the night before at 10:43 p.m. He sent a final good-night text, which went unanswered. Aaron assumed she had simply fallen asleep. The next morning, his concern grew when his usual good morning message also got no reply. More alarmingly, the message itself hadn't been delivered. Her phone was either off or had no service. Police cleared Aaron as a suspect after confirming his alibi for that morning. In fact, Aaron told investigators he'd been planning to propose for weeks. He was saving for a ring, just waiting for the right moment. He'd wanted that moment to be Halloween night, her favorite holiday. But that chance was now lost forever. For a time, police wondered if Rebecca had simply left Aaron and disappeared on her own. But that theory was quickly dismantled. Everyone insisted Rebecca was deeply in love and dreamed of marrying him. They frequently discussed their future and building a family. Chad was next, and his account was unremarkable. He spoke of his ex with affection, stating that despite their history, they shared an amicable relationship focused on their son's well-being. Finally, authorities focused on one other key man in her life, Pastor John White, her mother's fiancé, who played a large role in raising Connor. He was possibly the last person to have seen her alive while picking up Connor for his dad. As Rebecca prepared for her day, he oversaw the child's morning routine. This put John under intense examination. Detectives homed in on the specifics of his account, and that degree of pressure is enough to make anyone falter. It's easy to misremember small details before you realize they hold immense weight. What was her outfit? Did she act normally? Did she appear anxious? Did she mention her plans for work? The questions were relentless, but investigators believed John might hold a key, some small detail that could point them toward Rebecca. John seemed willing to help, recounting the morning's events for them. At 55 years old, his routine involved rising early to assist Rebecca. He recalled reaching the trailer, where the porch light was on and the door unlocked, suggesting she was already preparing for her day. Inside, he heard the shower running, so he never laid eyes on Rebecca, only her voice. She had called out that Connor was sleeping and told him to rest for a while, with a final request to turn off the heat when he left. John drifted off on the couch until around 8 o'clock when Connor stirred. By that time, Rebecca was already gone. He simply dressed the boy and took him to his father's. On its face, John's account was perfectly normal. There were no immediate red flags. Yet, one small thing struck detectives as peculiar. John had fresh marks on his nose and hands, scratches that resembled defensive injuries. When questioned, he offered a plausible reason for them. He claimed a shelf had fallen and struck him while he was doing repairs in his trailer. He even invited the detectives to see the scene for themselves. They accepted his story for the moment and continued their inquiry. Investigators spoke with neighbors, friends, and relatives, essentially anyone in Rebecca's circle, hoping to paint a true picture of her relationship with John White. Slowly, a narrative began to form from these conversations, revealing details that didn't quite add up. Their focus then returned to John, pending any new leads. They questioned around 24 members of his congregation. By all accounts, Pastor White was beloved. Sally Gay, a fellow church member, had once seen an ad for a pastor and mentioned it to John. He had been licensed as a minister for years. He went for the position and got the job. The church elder who hired him insisted to police that Pastor White was a godly man, incapable of involvement. He was known as a mild-mannered and approachable person. His reputation for helpfulness wasn't limited to Rebecca. He often cleared the gutters on her house. He helped a family with 6 kids build a deck and frequently watched their children. For over 6 years, John was a fixture in their lives, earning their absolute confidence. Police maintained it was standard procedure, that they had to eliminate all possibilities. But the more townspeople they questioned, the more rumors circulated that Pastor John White was a person of interest. And public perception began to change, especially after staff at a local bar came forward. It seemed the pastor had a taste for hard liquor, a habit his congregation would surely disapprove of. On that Halloween morning, he'd been in the bar, inquiring about Rebecca. Co-workers also recalled her saying John made her so uncomfortable she was considering a move. And they weren't alone in noticing a strange dynamic in his behavior toward her. Aaron had seen it as well. Rebecca's boyfriend described John's fixation on her as borderline obsessive. When Rebecca got a new hairstyle, White's daily praise became a ritual. He would arrive unannounced at her home, or even her job, creating a deeply uncomfortable situation. He wasn't a father figure. He saw her as an attractive young woman. His own sister recalled his emotional phone calls to police, in which he declared he'd found his true family: Sally, Rebecca, and Connor. But when Rebecca began dating Aaron, John's possessiveness started to show. He accused her of deserting him after all he had provided for her. He repeated the claim constantly, which his sister dismissed at the time. Why would a teenager spend her days with older adults? She saw no red flags back then, never sensing the dark undertones. But with Rebecca gone, she feared his focus had dangerously shifted from her mother to Rebecca herself. His obsession seemed sinister, especially knowing his background. Due to these inconsistent stories, police requested Pastor White take a lie detector test. It was the most direct way to determine if he was being truthful. Still, polygraphs are imperfect and can be skewed by simple stress. John was reluctant. Rebecca's mother, Sally, had to persuade him. She argued the results would officially clear his name in the disappearance. Once John White finally conceded, a detective personally drove him. He was collected in a patrol car and placed up front in the passenger seat. The plan was to create a relaxed mood on the way, hoping he might reveal something. They made casual, small talk, and the pastor let his guard down. The tactic succeeded before they even got there. John began to confess. He explained his hesitation, revealing a criminal history hidden even from his fiancée and his congregation. These were not small transgressions. He had been connected to a case of attempted murder. He claimed he was young then, a completely different man who made choices. A series of terrible choices that had landed him in prison. He insisted to the officer that the charges were wrongful and had scarred him. Upon his release, he swore he had become a completely new person. The church offered redemption, and he claimed to have taken it. As investigators worked around the clock, the local community mobilized. In that close-knit town, nearly everyone was desperate to do something. Volunteers quickly organized search groups, scouring the terrain near Rebecca's house for any possible sign or clue. Social media platforms were flooded with urgent pleas for tips. Her photograph was on flyers posted on every available public surface. As tension escalated with no new information, investigators were digging into John's history. What they uncovered was absolutely horrifying. The discovery sent a shockwave through the entire police force. The man who used his own dark past to help others was not who he claimed to be. So, one older and one younger, and he maintained a strong bond with both. His father was the town's police chief and also the fire chief. Anytime John acted up, word got back to his dad, which kept him on the straight and narrow. Upon graduating, White enlisted in the Navy. After his discharge, he married, bought a home, and befriended his 17-year-old neighbor, Teresa Etherington. One afternoon, he coaxed Teresa down into his basement. He used the ruse of a model car racetrack he had built. She trusted him completely. He was just the nice guy next door, so she went with him. But the moment she stepped inside, John lunged, driving a knife just beneath her right shoulder blade. Stunned, Teresa spun around to see John White standing there, holding the weapon. His face was twisted into an expression of sheer agony. The brutal assault continued. He stabbed her 15 times, then tried to strangle her. Incredibly, she survived and immediately identified John as her assailant. She also told investigators that White had claimed this wasn't his first victim, a chilling confession that suggested he had done this before. John was promptly arrested, formally charged, and convicted of attempted murder. He spun a story for his wife, claiming Teresa attacked him with a knife to steal his drugs. He had cuts all over his hands to back up his claim. In the courtroom, White put on an act as a deeply remorseful man. He called it a terrible youthful mistake, vowing he would never hurt anyone again. He was 22 years old at the time. For the vicious attack, White was given a sentence of 5 to 10 years in prison and was also ordered to undergo mandatory psychological counseling. 2 years later, in 1983, he appealed, arguing his lawyer had failed him. The appeal actually worked, getting his sentence reduced. He was freed after just 2 years, getting 2 more on probation with mandatory therapy. And just that easily, John White got away with a savage assault on a defenseless young woman. A legal error and a permissive judge meant John was back on the streets, though his compulsion to harm women remained. A decade later, he had 2 kids, with a third expected. For years, he drove a truck, but he found a steadier job at a commercial laundry after his children were born. He was in charge of maintaining the equipment. It was there that his dark compulsions resurfaced. In July of 1994, 26-year-old Vicky Sewall vanished. She was a colleague at the laundry and was secretly involved with John. They would meet behind a store. The last time she was seen was in his pickup truck. Investigators immediately zeroed in on John White. He admitted the affair but swore he had dropped Vicky off completely unharmed. He claimed he had no idea what became of her after that. But then he stated that he had been experiencing blackouts. He implied he couldn't be sure he hadn't done something to her. Right after that, he confessed to his wife that he couldn't go on and wanted to end it all. Instead, he drove off and started drinking heavily. Investigators later found blood in his pickup, but the traces were too minimal for a DNA profile. DNA technology at the time demanded a much more substantial sample to work with. After 6 weeks, a person walking nearby spotted a white sneaker in the grass, just 3 kilometers from where Vicky vanished. As he approached, he saw drag marks and detected the potent, undeniable scent of decay. The discovery was the body of Vicky Sue Wall. The body was severely decomposed from its long exposure to the elements, leaving the medical examiner unable to name a precise cause of death. What was evident was that some of her clothing had been removed. Investigators found her shirt and bra twisted around her neck. It was obvious this wasn't natural. It was murder. And John White was the #1 suspect. He was then at a psychiatric facility, seemingly preparing to plead insanity to dodge prison again. White refused a polygraph and would not discuss his relationship with the victim, so police lacked sufficient evidence for a murder indictment. Prosecutors offered a plea bargain for manslaughter, which he accepted. The judge noted his history of violence towards women during the sentencing, handing down the maximum sentence of 8 to 15 years. However, investigators had uncovered more. He boasted to friends and family about his days working as a trucker. He often hired sex workers, referring to them with the crude term, lot lizards. Afterward, he would abandon them near trash dumpsters, viewing them as disposable. These women never went to the authorities, but what happened to Teresa and Vicky proved his disturbing stories were entirely true. Behind bars, White revealed to his psychologist desires to murder the prosecutor, his lawyer, and the judge. He also confessed to disturbing fantasies involving their corpses during his time inside. His wife divorced him, and he also lost both of his parents. That's when White started studying scripture, claiming to feel remorse, professing a new life for God. He joined group therapy and saw mental health counselors. He obtained a minister's license, playing the part of a model inmate, and was almost always found inside the prison's chapel. Despite the massive red flags in his psychology and conduct, the system bought his act of reform, freeing him in 2007 to return to society. He was released without probation or any supervision. Out of prison, White headed north to begin again, meeting Rebecca Gay's mother, Sally, online. Soon, he was living with her in a trailer park and pastoring a church in Mount Pleasant. While seeking the church position, White explained his prison time by claiming he was with a woman who used drugs. The story was she fatally overdosed. He panicked and fled, and was then convicted. They believed his explanation. John always thanked his small flock for the second chance, but inside, nothing had changed. He just moved far enough away for his dark history to seem like a distant memory. His depraved fantasies never left him. The truth was, John was deeply disturbed. Investigators now feared he'd made Rebecca the victim of his twisted fantasies. As Pastor John White was being tested, a look into his past revealed a horrifying pattern of violence that stunned investigators. He had been upfront about his prior legal issues, but he had grossly understated the true nature of his offenses. The church knew of some issues, but the elders saw a reformed man living in the present, not the past. White assisted fellow congregants, even babysat their children, presenting a quiet, respectable image. But was this all a mask for a deeply sinister secret? Once investigators grasped the true extent of his deceit, his performance lost all credibility. The polygraph results flagged nearly every answer as deceptive. Armed with the failed polygraph, police got a warrant for his truck and trailer. Inside the truck, suspicious red stains and a necklace, snapped as if torn from a victim's throat. In the cab, they discovered a bag containing zip ties and industrial-strength trash bags, and women's underwear in Rebecca's exact size. In the trailer, another discovery, a rubber mallet showing traces of blood. Faced with the evidence, White still claimed Rebecca was the victim of a kidnapping and denied any knowledge of her fate. The questioning dragged on for nearly 12 hours. It stretched into the early hours of November 1st, 2012. Sensing the interrogation was at a standstill, the detectives changed tactics. Their new strategy was to play on his emotions. They knew White cared for Sally, Rebecca's mother, and wished to avoid causing her more pain. She had brought him stability, supported his ministry, and embraced him as family. Investigators painted a grim picture of Rebecca's body decomposing over time. The decay, the horrific sight that would confront her mother, and the trauma her young son, Connor, would carry forever. They pressed him, suggesting a confession was the only way to honor his love for Sally. At first, he demanded a lawyer, but after a long period of silence alone in the room, he finally broke, but on one condition: a final call to his fiancée. When Sally answered, White told her she was the greatest love he'd ever known. He warned that after this call she'd never want to speak to him again, but gave no reason why. Instead, he just kept apologizing, saying what was done could not be undone. After hanging up, Pastor White made his demand: life in solitary confinement for a full confession. He then admitted to the murder of Rebecca Gay. He laid out his version of events, claiming an attraction to Rebecca had begun to grow. On Halloween Eve, he viewed online content involving necrophilia, which he said triggered a dark curiosity. Fueled by several large beers, he went to her house around 2 a.m. and found the door unlocked. He let himself inside. When Rebecca came out of her room to investigate, he bludgeoned her head with the mallet. As she was blacking out, she looked right at him, recognizing her attacker. Her final vision was the face of a man she had considered a friend. Seeing she still clung to life, he cinched a zip tie around her throat, pulling with brutal force. He then moved her body to the kitchen and removed all of her clothing. He would later claim to have no memory of sexually assaulting her body. He tried scrubbing the blood away with cleaning spray and rags. He shut off her phone, snatched her Buick keys, and abandoned the car near a tavern. Her keys and phone he then ditched in a dumpster to create a false trail. On his walk back to the trailer, he sealed the bloody fabrics and Rebecca's body inside a large contractor bag. As he heaved the bag into his truck, it ripped open. Her necklace fell out and a trail of blood appeared. That single mistake was the very clue that would eventually expose him. He left Rebecca's body in a gully near the trailer park before discarding the crimson towels. Evidence was deliberately scattered over a 1-kilometer area. After covering his tracks, he went back to her trailer and slept on her couch all night. The following morning, he changed the boy's clothes, returned him to his father, and feigned ignorance. Rebecca Gay's remains were discovered in the exact ravine he described, her wounds perfectly matching his account. John White received a minimum of 56 to a maximum of 85 years behind bars, meaning parole was off the table for 56 years. At 55 years old, this was effectively a sentence to die in prison. Society has no place for some individuals, the judge told him, and you are one. But this monstrous pastor proved too cowardly to face his judgment. Just 4 months later, on August 28, 2013, he ended his own life inside his cell. The John Douglas White investigation highlighted profound flaws within our legal system. It failed to identify a predator, allowing more women to fall victim. Sometimes the most dangerous truths hide behind the kindest smiles. This story reminds us that appearances can be deceiving, and blind trust can come at a painful cost. In a world where we are taught to be polite, to believe in goodness, and to see the best in others, we must also learn to protect ourselves by listening to our instincts. Safety is not built on fear, but on awareness. We should never ignore the quiet voice inside us that senses something is wrong. Teaching young people to recognize boundaries, to speak up, and to trust their feelings is not just important, it is essential. Communities must also understand that true safety comes from vigilance, open communication, and the courage to question what seems normal. This story is not just about darkness, it is about awakening. It urges us to be more attentive, more compassionate, and more responsible for one another. Because sometimes, a single moment of awareness can prevent a lifetime of regret. In the end, the greatest lesson is this: kindness should never mean vulnerability, and trust should always be earned, not assumed. If you made it this far, you are a dedicated true crime aficionado. Please subscribe, enable notifications, and give us a like. We will see you next time.